The Han Chinese make up the largest ethnic group on Earth, with over 1.3 billion people identifying as Han today. For centuries, they've been seen as the cultural and genetic backbone of China, tracing their roots to ancient dynasties along the Yellow River, the so-called cradle of Chinese civilization. From imperial scholars to modern textbooks, the Han identity has often been portrayed as both continuous and unified, a straight line from past to present. But now, cutting-edge genetic research is revealing something far more complex and far more fascinating. Deep beneath the surface of this shared identity lies a web of ancient migrations, local adaptations, and surprising mixtures. It turns out that the Han Chinese are not the descendants of a single homogeneous people, but the outcome of millennia of blending between multiple ancient populations. Recent DNA studies, drawn from ancient human remains and modern genomes across China, are forcing historians and scientists to rethink the genetic story of East Asia. These studies show that the Han identity is less about a single origin and more about cultural assimilation of farmers and foragers, northerners and southerners, and even influences from the distant west via the Silk Road. This journey into the genetic roots of the Han Chinese will uncover forgotten ancestors, ancient interactions, and regional variations long masked by a shared cultural label. From the millet fields of the north to the rice paddies of the south, and from imperial edicts to intermarriages with local tribes, we'll see how genetics offers a powerful new window into one of the world's oldest and most influential civilizations. Get ready, because the story of the Han Chinese is not what we thought. It's richer, more diverse, and more surprising than ever before. The conventional narrative of Han Chinese origins often begins in the cradle of Chinese civilization, the Yellow River Basin. This fertile valley in northern China is where Neolithic cultures like Yangshao, 5000 to 3000 BCE, and Longshan, 3000 to 1900 BCE thrived, giving rise to early agriculture, pottery, and eventually complex societies. But while archaeology gave us artifacts and settlement patterns, genetics is now shedding new light on the people themselves, who they were, where they came from, and how they shaped what would become the Han identity. Recent studies of ancient DNA from skeletons found along the Yellow River reveal a population primarily descended from early millet farming communities. These early northern Chinese people were remarkably distinct from groups in the south, where rice farming had independently developed. But interestingly, they weren't an isolated tribe. Genetic evidence shows that even these early farmers carried DNA from earlier hunter-gatherer populations, meaning there was mixing even before farming fully took hold. Over time, as these early cultures expanded and developed into the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, a shared political and cultural identity began to emerge in the north. But that identity wasn't necessarily uniform in genetic terms. Populations from the Western Steppe and Central Asia occasionally filtered in, likely through trade and migration along what would become the early Silk Road corridors. Some minor West Eurasian ancestry has even been detected in ancient remains from this period, hinting at broader interactions than previously assumed. Still, the strongest genetic legacy of the Neolithic Yellow River people remains firmly rooted in East Asia. These were the foundational ancestors of what would later be called Han Chinese, not in a single genetic event, but through slow processes of migration, agriculture, warfare, and diplomacy. What's striking is how cohesive this Neolithic ancestry became over time, forming the dominant genetic core of northern Han populations. Yet, as the Han expanded southward and westward in later centuries, they encountered and absorbed many other peoples. So while the Yellow River may have birthed the first Han-like societies, the genetic story was already one of fusion, not purity. And it was just the beginning. As the early Han identity solidified in northern China, a new chapter began: the expansion into the lush, subtropical regions of the south. The Yangtze River Valley, home to rice farming cultures like the Hemudu and Liangzhu, represented not just a geographic frontier, but a genetic and cultural one as well. What unfolded was one of the most profound demographic shifts in East Asian history, transforming the Han people from a regional group into the largest ethnic identity on Earth. Genetic studies now show that as Han political and military influence moved southward, particularly during the Qin and Han dynasties, this was accompanied by large-scale population movements. Northern Han settlers brought with them the DNA of Yellow River millet farmers, but the regions they entered were already home to diverse and ancient peoples. These southern populations, sometimes called Austroasiatic or Proto-Tichidai, had a distinct genetic makeup shaped by thousands of years of adaptation to rice agriculture and tropical environments. Instead of replacing these groups, Northern Han migrants intermarried and integrated with them. Over generations, a remarkable genetic blending occurred. Southern Han populations today carry a hybrid ancestry, part rooted in northern Neolithic farmers and part derived from ancient southern rice-growing communities. In fact, modern genetic maps of China show a clear north-south gradient, with more southern lineages appearing gradually as you move down the map. Linguistically and culturally, this merge also left its mark. While Standard Mandarin is derived from northern dialects, many southern variants, like Cantonese, Hokkien, and Hakka, carry influences from older regional tongues. Similarly, local customs, foods, and beliefs often reflect this dual heritage. Interestingly, even the idea of being Han expanded during this era. Initially tied to geography and political allegiance, it evolved to include anyone who embraced Chinese language, Confucian values, and centralized rule. Thus, Han identity became both a cultural and genetic umbrella, one broad enough to include a patchwork of ancestries. In short, the southward expansion wasn't just conquest, it was convergence. It proved that Han identity was never biologically rigid, but was forged in the dynamic mixing of peoples, traditions, and genes across China's river systems. China's long imperial history, spanning over 2 millennia from the Qin dynasty through the Qing, was not just a story of emperors and dynastic change. It was also a period of profound population movement, integration, and cultural synthesis. As the empire expanded and contracted, peoples from diverse ethnic, linguistic, and geographic backgrounds were absorbed into the Han cultural fold. Recent genetic studies reveal just how complex and fluid the genetic landscape of imperial China became. The early Han dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, laid the foundation for large-scale administrative and military colonization of frontier zones. Northern Han settlers moved into areas such as the south, the northwest, and even into present-day Vietnam and Korea. Along the way, they encountered and merged with indigenous groups like the Baiwa in the south and the Chang in the west. Genetic evidence shows these interactions weren't one-sided. There was widespread admixture and assimilation. Over generations, these populations began to identify as Han, even as their DNA retained traces of local ancestry. The Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, one of China's most cosmopolitan periods, saw a dramatic influx of foreign influence through the Silk Road. Trade and diplomacy brought Central Asians, Persians, Arabs, and even Europeans into the Chinese heartland. DNA from burial sites in modern populations suggests intermarriage between these foreign merchants and local Chinese, especially in major cities like Chang'an, modern Xi'an, then one of the world's most diverse urban centers. Similarly, the Yuan dynasty, 1271 to 1368 CE, established by the Mongols, facilitated a different kind of genetic exchange. The empire's vast reach brought Turkic, Mongolic, Persian, and Slavic peoples into contact with native Chinese groups. The Mongol policy of moving populations across their empire for administrative and military purposes led to genetic blending on an unprecedented scale. For example, some northern Han Chinese today show minor genetic signals traceable to Central Asia, likely remnants of this period. The Ming 1368 to 1644 and Qing 1644 to 1912 dynasties continued to encourage internal migration as a means of consolidating power and reclaiming land. Ming policies repopulate areas devastated by previous conflicts with settlers from other parts of China, facilitating the blending of regional populations. The Qing, led by the Manchus, initially maintained an ethnic distinction from Han Chinese, But over centuries, extensive intermarriage and cultural assimilation effectively dissolved many of those boundaries. What modern genetic research reveals is that the Han Chinese identity, often perceived as monolithic, is in fact a tapestry woven from countless threads. It has been shaped by migrations, conquests, alliances, and the everyday unions of diverse peoples across millennia. Whether through forced relocation, trade, colonization, or peaceful settlement, these movements have left lasting imprints on the Chinese genome. The imperial era was not a time of isolation, but of continuous integration. As dynasties rose and fell, the people of China were not just passive subjects. They were active agents in creating one of the most intricate genetic legacies in human history. For centuries, the Silk Road was more than a trade route. It was a vast network of cultural, religious, and biological exchange. Stretching from the heart of China to the Mediterranean, it linked the Han Chinese world with Central Asia, Persia, the Middle East, and beyond. While much has been said about the goods that traveled these roads, silk, spices, gold, and ideas, what recent genetic studies are revealing is the enduring legacy of human movement and intermixing, particularly along China's western frontiers. Beginning during the Han Dynasty 206 BCE, 220 CE, Chinese envoys, merchants, and soldiers pushed into the western regions, establishing contact with the Sogdians, Scythians, Tocharians, and other Central Asian peoples. Archaeological finds from ancient tombs in places like Xinjiang show not only Chinese artifacts, but also Greek-style murals, Persian coins, and Indo-European mummies, clear signs of a cultural melting pot. But it's in the DNA where the most surprising connections lie. Modern genetic research has shown that populations in China's western regions, particularly in Xinjiang and Gansu, carry clear markers of Central Asian and West Eurasian ancestry. These signals, which are less pronounced in Eastern Han populations, indicate centuries of intermarriage and genetic blending along the Silk Road corridors. The famous Darim Basin mummies, dating back to 2000 BCE, already exhibited European-like features and DNA, suggesting that these connections predated even the Han Dynasty and intensified over time. As the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, expanded Chinese influence westward, the Silk Road reached its golden age. Chang'an, the Tang capital, became one of the most multicultural cities on Earth, home to traders and scholars from across Asia. Genetic signatures from this era suggest that Central Asians, Persians, and South Asians settled in Chinese cities and integrated into the population, leaving genetic traces still found in parts of the modern Han genome. The Mongol Empire, spanning the 13th and 14th centuries, supercharged these east-west connections. Under the Yuan dynasty, which ruled China, peoples from across Eurasia were relocated to facilitate governance, commerce, and administration. Genetic studies confirm an uptick in admixture during this period, with some Han populations acquiring small but significant Central Asian and West Asian DNA components. The story of the Han Chinese is not one of genetic isolation. The Silk Road ensured a continuous flow of people, culture, and genes across vast distances. While today's Han majority may appear unified linguistically and culturally, their DNA carries echoes of these ancient interactions, proof that China's genetic story has always been deeply intertwined with the broader history of Eurasia. Though commonly referred to as a single ethnic group, the Han Chinese are far from genetically uniform. Spanning a vast geographical area, the Han population is internally diverse, shaped by thousands of years of regional migration, intermarriage, conquest, and cultural assimilation. Modern genetic studies have now uncovered clear distinctions between the Han in the north, central, and south of China, offering a more nuanced understanding of their complex genetic heritage. The northern Han, traditionally centered around the Yellow River Basin, represent the oldest core of Han civilization. This region was the cradle of early Chinese dynasties like the Shang and Zhou. Genetically, Northern Han tend to show higher affinity to ancient Neolithic agricultural populations of the North China Plain and exhibit closer ties to Central Asian gene pools. This is likely due to repeated migrations and invasions across the Eurasian steppe, including by nomadic groups such as the Xiongnu, Mongols, and others. As a result, Northern Han often carry slightly more West Eurasian genetic markers compared to their southern counterparts. Moving to the Central Han, who reside in the Yangtze River Basin and surrounding areas, we see a blending zone. These populations bear signatures of both northern ancestry and increasing southern East Asian admixture. The Han expansion during the Qin and Han dynasties moved large populations southward into the Yangtze region, where they assimilated or mixed with local non-Han groups, such as the ancient Baihui. Over centuries, this fusion created a genetic gradient, with Central Han populations bridging the gap between North and South. The Southern Han, concentrated in provinces like Guangdong, Guangxi, and Fujian, reveal even more complex ancestry. They often carry higher proportions of what researchers term Southern East Asian, or Austroasiatic-related ancestry. This reflects historical contact and genetic blending with indigenous groups of the South, many of whom were later Sinicized. Genetic markers in this group are also consistent with Southeast Asian connections, reflecting both ancient migrations and maritime interactions. Despite these differences, all three Han subgroups share a broad genetic unity, pointing to a shared origin and continuous gene flow across regions. However, subtle distinctions in DNA, alongside linguistic accents and cultural traits, reveal the dynamic history of internal diversity within the Han identity. In essence, the Han are not a monolith, but a living mosaic of regional histories. Their DNA is a map not only of conquest and migration, but of adaptation, assimilation, and cultural resilience across China's immense and varied landscape. One of the most remarkable features of Han Chinese identity is how it has continually expanded, not just through population growth, but through cultural and genetic assimilation. Throughout imperial history, various non-Han ethnic groups became Han over time, blurring the lines between distinct populations and weaving new threads into the Han genetic fabric. From the Qin and Han dynasties onward, the Chinese state often encouraged or enforced the Sinicization of peripheral peoples. This was not merely a political process, but a demographic and cultural transformation. As the empire expanded south and west, indigenous groups like the Baihui in the south and Chang in the west were gradually incorporated. Over generations, many adopted Han language, customs, surnames, and ways of life, eventually becoming indistinguishable from the Han majority. Yet their genetic signatures endured, subtly shifting the regional DNA landscape. In the Tang and Song eras, further assimilation occurred as Central Asian and nomadic peoples, including Turks, Sogdians, and Mongolic tribes, entered Chinese territory as traders, soldiers, or settlers. Many of these groups intermarried with local Han populations and were absorbed into the expanding Han identity. By the time of the Yuan and Ming dynasties, the Han cultural label had broadened significantly, encompassing people from many ethnic and genetic backgrounds. This process continued into the Qin dynasty, during which groups like the Manchus, despite ruling China, saw many of their descendants assimilate into Han society through intermarriage and cultural adoption. Over time, distinct minority identities faded, while Han identity remained resilient and inclusive. Genetically, this has created a diverse but interconnected Han population. The DNA of today's Han Chinese carries the echoes of dozens of ancient peoples, reflecting a history not of isolation, but of continuous interaction and integration, where being Han was as much about cultural belonging as genetic ancestry. In the 21st century, the Han Chinese identity is being reshaped once again, not through imperial assimilation, but through globalization, urbanization, and migration. Major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen have become melting pots where regional Han subgroups and ethnic minorities mix at an unprecedented scale. In these urban hubs, accents blur, dialects fade, and new forms of cultural expression emerge that reflect a modern, Pan-Han identity rooted in shared language and lifestyle more than ancestral region. Genetically, this urbanization leads to more homogenization. People from different corners of China, each carrying slight regional genetic variations, whether northern, southern, or western, are marrying and having children. This is reducing the subtle distinctions once seen in local Han populations.
Modern urban Han Chinese often carry a more blended genetic signature, reflecting the convergence of diverse ancestral lines. Meanwhile, the global Han diaspora, stretching from Southeast Asia to North America, Europe, and beyond, adds a new dimension to Han identity. Many overseas Han communities were formed through historical waves of migration, each bringing specific regional backgrounds. Today, however, these communities are reconnected digitally and culturally with China, creating a transnational Han identity that's both rooted in tradition and influenced by global norms. Modern DNA studies show that while Han Chinese share a strong genetic core, shaped by millennia of integration and expansion, regional and international variation continues to enrich that identity. Global intermarriage and cosmopolitan living further broaden what it means to be Han in today's world. In essence, Han identity today is no longer just about bloodlines or birthplace. It is a dynamic, evolving idea shaped by history, migration, and shared culture, one that continues to expand and adapt in an increasingly interconnected world. The Han Chinese are often spoken of as a single, unified people, the largest ethnic group in the world. But DNA tells a more complex and fascinating story. Far from being a monolith, the Han genetic legacy reveals a rich tapestry woven from thousands of years of migrations, assimilations, and regional adaptations. Genetic studies show that while Han Chinese across China share a strong common ancestry, particularly from early Neolithic farming populations in the Yellow River Basin, there are notable differences between northern, central, and southern Han. These differences reflect ancient layers of integration with local populations, such as southern tribal groups, northern nomads, and western Silk Road communities. The Han label, therefore, is not the result of one ancient tribe expanding, but a dynamic fusion of diverse peoples unified over time by language, culture, and state power. This has major implications for how Han identity is understood today. DNA doesn't undermine Han unity, it enriches it. It shows that Han-ness was never about exclusivity, but about inclusion. The process of becoming Han has always involved absorbing new groups, adopting new traits, and blending old and new identities. From imperial expansions to modern urbanization and global diaspora, Han identity has remained adaptable and evolving. In a modern era where ethnicity is often politicized or simplified, genetic evidence provides a grounding reminder. Identity is not frozen in time. The Han experience proves that a strong collective identity can arise from genetic diversity, not in spite of it. By peering into the genome, we're not erasing the past, we're revealing its depth. And for the Han Chinese, that past is not a single origin story, but a long, braided river of human history. A story of unity built from diversity, and one still being written today.